Recently, freedom of speech has come under attack. This has been going on for a while and people talk about it. My personal view on freedom of speech is, first of all, let's define it. It is almost entirely the spoken word, the written word, etc., etc. Symbols on t-shirts, yeah, those can be speech. Somebody doing a crime in order to film it probably is not. There was a woman who was on a segment there was a woman who was being interviewed, and she was let go from walking around topless because she was doing it to protest the fact that she wasn't allowed to walk around topless. But just walking around topless because she didn't like tan lines, that's not speech. No. If a woman's nudity is dangerous, then doing it for speech purposes doesn't make it any less. She can express herself without actually doing the act. If it's not dangerous, then it probably shouldn't be illegal anyway. That being said, that is the problem. Also, freedom of speech. In order for Ben Shapiro to have freedom of speech on Monday, Michael Moore might have to wait till Tuesday to speak. And let's be honest, if you're coming down my neighborhood at 3 a.m. with a bullhorn to express yourself, the cops better stop you or you're going to eat your bullhorn. All of these are legitimate exceptions to speech. What cannot and should not be limitations to freedom of speech is, during an election year, silencing people who want to criticize certain politicians running for office. That is exactly what the case Citizens United was about. That being said, who has obligations to freedom of speech? It's quite common to say just the government. But considering you can have big-time corporations and others find ways of making it almost impossible for the wrong people to be heard, I don't think this is necessarily true. Morally, ethically, I do believe there are certain groups that have more obligations of freedom of speech than others. It's not just government, but also private citizens. But I also think there's even limitations to the government's obligation to freedom of speech. So I'm going to define these two real quick. 1, the government. They should not be able to stop you from speaking, 1, on resources that are yours. If you own a movie theater, you want to show a movie criticizing Hillary Clinton, that should be legal, and calling it an in-kind contribution, in other words, trying to limit the effectiveness of speech not directly controlled by the powerful. That's exactly what the freedom of speech is designed to protect. So, but if you're deciding to protest something by standing in the middle of the street and making it so people can't get to work, get to school, whatever, that's not just a speech, that's a violation. Now, holding a protest at, say, a public park in front of a government building, those should absolutely be protected. Now, what about schools funded by government money? Well, they should have methods for having student groups invite speakers, professors inviting speakers to come and talk to their class. Whether that be Richard Wolff, who I do not think is good at the subject that he, as a professor of economics, teaches. But if there's somebody who believes, if there is a person within the class, within the school who thinks he's worth listening to, they should be allowed to do it. However, I do not think that, say, a medical school should be obligated to have faith or psychic healers come in and try and tell future doctors that they can just wave their hand and force away cancer. So even then, time, place, and manner restrictions, even by government-funded school. But who has obligations to it outside of the government? Social media has certain protections written into the law because theoretically at the time they would not have the technology to control or limit the speech on their platforms. But now it's much easier to do that with modern technology. But I also think that it can and should try and maintain a certain level of freedom of speech because this gives people like me a better chance of challenging the powerful. I had a friend who I did not like, but I did not like his politics. He did make YouTube videos. And he thought he might be able to take down a certain president that he didn't like. And there were times when we had conflicts. But he needed the ability to speak. Doing so made this more than just a business. However, I do think that private platforms like YouTube, like Facebook, Twitter, etc., can have terms of service that are not necessarily tied to the law. However, legal standards should be. For example, using racial slurs. You can discuss important issues such as crime stats, such as important issues that are happening today, but you do not have to use racial slurs. But if they're going to ban racial slurs, then they can and must do so equally, regardless of the slur, by saying, no, you can't do it. Now, in the case of making exceptions for artistic expression, for certain things, I do think they can have leeway, but it can't be based off of, we like that guy better than you. Who doesn't have an obligation to freedom of speech is, say, CPAC, when a well-known adult actress decided to go because she called herself conservative, besides having a major occupational decision that did not correspond to most people's view on what conservatism should be within and usually without. Now, there are 4 fundamental reasons why we should have the freedom of speech. Why the freedom of speech is important. 1, I am wrong. Shocking. I'm admitting that there's something that I'm going to say that I may be incorrect. And if I had the power to silence opposition voices, that could hurt others. So, in a certain level of humility, I'm willing to respect that I'm wrong. The opposite is also true. You're wrong. The people in power who are deciding things, the people in power who are saying mis and disinformation, who will cancel somebody, who will attempt to silence somebody, claiming something may be quote-unquote Russian disinformation, and blindly think that it is, regardless of what they find out to be true. The third reason is, let's be honest, the other reasons are going to sort of connect to this. The third reason is, you can't know who the bad guy is until you actually hear them speak. Olivia Wilde said a lot of negative things about Jordan Peterson that just were not true. He is not what she said he is. He does not like incels. Often he talks about a certain level of personal responsibility in general society. That doesn't mean that everybody's going to be a millionaire if they just try really, really hard. That means you're not going to succeed if you don't try at all. Now, I may be paraphrasing it a little bit, but he talks about your personal responsibility. You are responsible to clean your own room. So, in order to know who Jordan Peterson actually is, you have to be able to listen to him. Because if people silence him, then you can slander him any way that you want. The fourth reason is powerful people like power. Powerful people need to be held to account. As soon as you give them the authority to silence people, whether you give them the ability to not be held to account, you give people the ability to silence others. There was, of course, a lot of people talked about the Hunter Biden laptop. Now, whether there was a smoking gun that implicated the president in his behavior, the truth is there's information out there that could have hurt him. What about Trump? Trump said and did some stupid things. Would you trust him with the authority to silence you? Would you trust him to not just make simple mistakes, but actively silence truthful content? I highly doubt that. That is why the freedom of speech is important. And even if you don't like the speaker, you should recognize this is the best chance to hold the powerful to account, recognize you might be wrong, and you need other voices to test your hypothesis. And even I recognize that I'm going to be wrong. So in conclusion, please, liberals, please, anybody who wants to silence freedom of speech because you don't like a particular issue, and recognize that it was written into the Constitution because our founding fathers, flawed human beings as they were, recognized that not only did they need the protection of the people against the powerful future tyrants similar to the ones they were fighting against, but they also understood they may need to hear voices that they don't like in order to make the best decisions possible.